This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. I'm Jeff C. Carter.
And I'm Ryan Gerasi.
Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, share our original spooky stories, and sometimes we put up our spooks.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare your minds and watch your hinds, for now is the season of fools and ghouls. In this corner, let the bodies hit the floor, then rise, then hit the floor again with Tales from the Crypt. And the challenger opening a window into madness. Are you afraid of the dark? Is it April Fool's or is this Put Up Your Spooks?
This week's theme:
April Fools. So you suggested an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark, and I found, I think, a slick match called Abracadaver from Tales from the Crypt.
Slick and slimy match.
So we start in black and white in a morgue. An older doctor, Dr. Martin Fairbanks, played by Beau Bridges, is lecturing Carl, a lazy med student who is also his younger brother. Martin quizzes Carl as they dig through the chest cavities of random corpses and bicker. Carl spots a naked young woman on a slab and boasts that he'd become a necrophiliac for her.
Time to sleaze. Instantaneous.
Very short. Martin chastises him, but Carl doesn't see the harm. She's dead. But Martin believes that in certain cases, brain activity can persist after clinical death. Carl honks her dead boob and says, "Whoa, there was a reaction. Could this be the most cryptastic opening of all time?" Martin is astonished, and he reaches over to perform a medical honk exam. The naked woman leaps up with a shriek, slams him to the cement floor, and violently throttles him. Other corpses begin to rise from their slabs, and Carl busts out laughing. A few other people run in with champagne because it's a prank. Specifically, a surprise birthday party zombie attack prank for his big brother Martin. And Martin can't help but chuckle, and then he can't help but collapse from a massive heart attack.
So she jumps up off the slab, and she wraps her hands around his neck and says, "Duh, touch me." And I was like, what if he, bashed her brains out in terror? That would have been some April Fool's prank.
I mean, as we can see, pranks can go terribly awry, and it's probably why the whole tradition of April Fools has faded in our modern mollycoddled society. We fade to black, and then we resume in color. Years have passed, and Carl is now a big shot at the hospital, while his big brother Martin works in a lab. He was crippled by the heart attack, and now he works for Carl. Martin pours some booze for them and then shows Carl his latest breakthrough research. He has 2 corpses hooked up to monitors, and they are still displaying brain activity. Then he opens a robotic drawer with a fully stocked voodoo altar, and he's ranting about all the great voodoo secrets about making the dead walk. Carl is pissed. He's fed up with Martin's creepy obsession. Just then, the drugs in his drink kick in. His heart stops, and he drops dead. Or does he? We see through Carl's POV as Martin injects him with his experimental glowing green voodoo drug and explains that his brain will stay alive as his senses fade one by one. This is his revenge. He even hooks him up to a heart monitor to show him that he's flatlined. He sends him to the morgue, where a dreadlock Rasta hangs him on a meat hook in the freezer. Carl is losing his mind. He thinks he's in hell.
Marty, don't go. You can't leave me like this. I can't stand it anymore. Oh, God, this is hell.
The next day, the Rastafarian mortician drags him out and blows weed into his mouth. Luckily, Carl's body has gone numb because the mortician slices his throat and drains his blood for embalming. Martin returns to the group of med students. He's going to show them how to saw through someone's face and remove their brain.
Oh, God, I'm being peeled. They're tearing my skull apart.
Carl jumps off the table screaming in unholy terror. Surprise! It was all a goof. Sort of. Martin wanted to prove that his drug worked, so he stopped Carl's heart and kept his brain alive. But he's only been under for 3 hours. Carl tells his older brother that he's proud of him, although we don't know if it's for his incredible scientific breakthrough or his hilarious prank. Carl can't help but chuckle. And then he can't help but collapse from a massive heart attack. Naturally, Martin suspects this is a high-level reverse revenge callback counter double prank. But it's not. They perform CPR on Carl, and Martin hurriedly injects him with another dose of voodoo juice. Carl dies. Or does he? Fade to white, and then Carl winds up on another slab with 2 new morticians. They are gossiping about the tragedy. His brother accidentally killed him because his experimental drug caused a real heart attack. They grab the saw and start cutting into his skull, and he can feel everything. The end.
Yeah. The whole time when the prank is happening, Beau Bridge is just like, don't worry. Feeling is the first thing to go. And he's like, he's right. I can't feel nothing. I'm numb. And then at the end, he's like, I can feel everything. So it's like, I don't know, terrible, terrifying. But the whole time I was like, okay, well, he's obviously pranking him. He must have given him a dose of tetrodotoxin or something just to paralyze him and make him think he was dead. But the prank is, I killed you. I literally killed you. And then he gave him the dose of the medicine, which keeps your brain alive and then brings you back to life, some sort of, but also causes massive heart attacks. So then when he had another massive heart attack and he gave him another dose of the medicine, he had to know that it would only lead to another massive heart attack later. But also, he then consigned him to the slab for a real autopsy, knowing full well that his medicine keeps your brain alive, and wouldn't he have been able to monitor the brain activity? And also, he went into his prank knowing that in only some cases, the brain continues its activity after death. So he killed first and asked questions later. I guess it was a worthwhile risk for his jerk brother.
This kind of research is important. You can't peel off a mouse's face and get valuable user data.
PETA will be all over you.
Yeah.
But also, all of his research students were fine with it.
Yes. It's this whole episode is packed with what the fuck factor. I'm just going to read off 4 in a row. You hit these beats, but my brain was reeling, and I had to, pin them down. Okay, what the fuck number 1? Martin actually stopped his heart for his prank. What the fuck number 2? They're saying the drug accidentally caused a heart attack, but Martin stopped Carl's heart on purpose with a different drug in the drink, not the voodoo juice. What the fuck number 3? How did Carl's heart restart?
Yeah.
Was it stopped for hours or just minutes? Because if it was for hours, he would have died anyway with no heartbeat, giving him circulation.
Well, they said that the lady's brain was active for a week after she died or whatever.
Yeah, that's great.
That's the whole point.
All your organs are going to fail if your heart's not beating.
But they have a miracle voodoo drug.
So the miracle voodoo drug keeps your brain activity going. Because when people's hearts stop, they stop. And he was flatlined. So he jumps off the slab when the drug wears off. And I don't know if his heart just restarted itself. So either his heart was stopped for hours, he would have died anyway, or his heart just stopped for minutes, which means that the zombie drug might not preserve brain activity at all. He could have just been paralyzed, like you said, with a fully functioning heart.
Yeah.
So in that case, it's not proof. So either way, it makes no sense.
You kind of have to just presume that whatever the green glowing reanimator drug that he gave him was, it somehow worked to keep his organs and tissues from failing while they were shut down completely. And then just magically reanimated him after a certain amount of prescribed time, voodoo time.
That's all fair. Just none of it is stated.
Right.
He only talks about brain function.
You have to make a lot of assumptions in that episode.
What the factor number 4, whether Martin believes that his drug preserves brain function or that it just occurs naturally, why would he allow his brother to get sent off for an autopsy?
Yeah.
Like you said,
Come on, dude.
It makes 0 sense. He knows his brother's going to be awake, especially because he dosed his brother with more voodoo juice.
More voodoo juice, yeah. You have to presume that he also had another heart attack and died and couldn't prevent his brother from being sent off to the autopsy.
And it's set up in a way where in the beginning it's a harmless prank like the most evil, vicious prank that's ever been done, but it was not intended to cause harm. And then Beau Bridges pays his brother back with an even more vicious, horrendous, psyche-shattering, horrible, psychological terrorism style prank. But he's like, hey, you're fully healthy. It's okay. I knew you'd be fine. And then he drops dead, and when his brother Carl has that unexpected heart attack, he's like, oh no, like CPR, let's save him. Like he's horrified that his brother is dying.
Right.
So we can't assume like this was his endgame all along, to actually consign him to get chopped up.
No, I don't think that was his endgame. You're right. But also, because he was so freaked out the second time, we can't assume that he even really killed him, like you said, in the first time with the poison in the whiskey or whatever. Because then, yeah, he would just be totally calm. We can't assume that he really actually knows anything about how any of it works.
I'm just taking his word for it, that he paralyzed his brother, stopped his vitals, and maintained his brain function in a very hand-wavy way. I mean, it's hard to even discuss because it is what the factor piled upon what the factor.
But also, I wonder if that kind of thing is like so much easier to take in the 1950s or whatever when the comic came out, and you're like, he's like, I gave you voodoo medicine, and now you're alive, but now you're dead, but now you're alive, and everyone's like, cool, yeah, it seems, I get it, I guess. It's the 1950s, baby.
I wonder if this is based on an original comic or a script that was written in the late 80s, early 90s.
So the younger brother is put through absolute hell, and he's just like so fucked up, and it would definitely break his brain, his still functioning brain. And then when he wakes up on the slab, he's like, oh, you sure got me. Totally fine with it, shrugs it off.
Yeah, I mean, we have to assume that these two brothers have been engaged
Just
in a
pranking each
lifelong
other.
prank war, the likes of which
The world has never seen.
It's just harrowing pranks.
Wanna play doctor? Then open wide and say,
Oh, this brings us to my episode. An episode I've been wanting to do for a while now. And it just was a coincidence that I suggested an April Fool's episode. April Fool's? Nope, I didn't realize. So this episode is Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of the Super Specs. And let me tell you, this episode's got everything I love. Sardo, Dutch angles, Canadian accents, miscegenation. Oh boy.
It's all in there.
It's all in there. So, we start outside the campfire. Gary and Kristen are at the Magic Mansion, owned by Gary's father.
At minute 1, mind blown.
And Gary's doing like awesome magic after awesome magic, but Kristen is not impressed by his magic. And she's like, so anyway, Gary, everyone's telling me that you suck and your stories are shit.
That was wild because, A, we're outside during the day. We're not at the campfire. We are in the shop that Gary mentioned in the Tale of the Carved Stone. So we know there's like a trunk around there that has the time-traveling monk's cloak in it and stuff. It totally looks like Sardo's Magic Mansion in there. And they are raising the stakes by bringing in the fact that everyone's been talking shit behind Gary's back. That is so wild. And this is the kind of heat that I wish Are You Afraid of the Dark brought more often. The drama around the Midnight Society. Because usually it just starts and stops at the campfire, and there's a little banter, a little bickering, but they don't bring these other elements into the story to frame it. And I wish they would do that more.
You know, it's interesting. I was going to say, well, then you cut into the story, but this story, as much as I love it, there's a little fat that could be trimmed off of certain scenes. So anyway, it cuts to the campfire. Gary has not arrived yet, and everyone is piling on. They're like, man, that Gary, what a filthy suck. I wish he told scary stories.
A filthy suck?
On my college, we got like some kind of laundry sack or something, and it was like filled with goodies and stuff when we first got to our dorm in Canada, my first day at the Canadian dorm. And like, or maybe it was the like slogan of our bar, our college bar or something. I can't remember where it was, but the slogan was "No sucks allowed." And I was like, no sucks? Can you just call someone a suck? Apparently you can.
That seems like something you'd go into a glory hole or something for a filthy suck.
Only filthy sucks allowed. So, except for Betty Ann, who's wonderful. She's just such a great person.
No way. Gary tells the best stories. I like his stories. Yeah.
And then she goes and smokes a bowl. So Gary arrives, and usually this is the moment where everyone's like, ooh, shh, he's here. Hey, clam up, everyone. And they're like, so anyway, everyone's been saying how much you suck, Gary. And he's like,
Yeah, it's out in the open at
God
least.
damn, all right. So he's like, well, I'll show you. So he starts to tell his story of the Super Specs. Weeds and Mary Beth are at Sardau's Magic Mansion. Weeds is like super into April Fools, and he's gearing up for the holiday. He's buying diarrhea. He's buying vomit. He's buying fart machines.
He does not buy the vomit.
He doesn't buy the vomit.
As much as Sardau pushes
Yeah.
it.
So he is playing around with this dust of Denderon, which are powdered monkey bones. He performs the spell of second sight and throws the monkey bones into the air, and a bunch of it lands on the Super Specs. Sardau, no mister, accent on the dough, appears, and he's like, hey, buy or leave. You're fucking wasting all my monkey bones. So they buy the monkey bones, they buy some Super Specs and whoopee cushions, and the whole time Mary Beth is kind of giving Weeds. I want to call him Bones, and it's only because there's monkey bones in this episode. Weeds. She's giving Weeds crap because he's kind of immature. They've been dating for 2 whole weeks now, and he's still like just delighted by whoopee cushions. Before they leave, she tries on the Super Specs, and she sees off in the corner a shrouded figure cloaked in black. But when she takes off the specs, shrouded figure's not there anymore. Cut to school. Weeds is like testing out the dust of Denderon. He puts a bunch of monkey bones in some girl's yogurt, which like
Nasty.
could probably have killed her. I mean,
A protein boost.
or like turned her into a zombie.
He's reading a Voodoo for Dummies type Cliff
Yeah.
Notes spell book.
I guess the spell book he was looking at Sardau's was probably way too expensive. It was a heavy leather-bound volume, which Sardau, I don't know how he got it. He couldn't have paid full price for that thing. He's such a cheapskate.
He just gets shipments of magic items and tries to sell them for a song.
People know they can dump their cursed items off on Sardau, and he won't bat an eyelash. She catches him in the act, and she pulls him to the ground around this gigantic tree that they're sitting on. And when she does this, like a giant dust cloud billows out all over her lunch. And I was like, well, don't eat it now. It's got dirt in there. But she eats the yogurt, and nothing happens. And so Weeds is like, man, what a ripoff. And he leaves. As soon as he does, the girl's like,
My voice. What's wrong with my voice? I sound like a chipmunk.
next scene, Weeds is still at it. He April Fools his best friend by putting a boxing glove in his locker. It's kind of funny. It punches the kid in the face.
Much has been made about how we all grew up living in fear of quicksand, but I think perhaps a only slightly less well-known fear was that a boxing glove on a spring arm would come rocketing out from some odd angle and break our jaw.
Apropos of nothing, I also wanted to point out the fact that at Sardau's Magic Mansion, they have these, what look like ice cream cones, and we had these, and it was just like a foam ball attached to a plastic ice cream cone on a string, and when you push the lever, the foam ball, it was spring-loaded, and the foam ball shot off. And I don't understand, was it meant to be that you give someone an ice cream, and they think it's real, and accidentally push the button, and it flings into their face? Nobody would ever have been fooled that it was real ice cream, so...
I mean, what you really did was you ran up to your friend and you popped him in the face. As
So
soon as
you had
could.
these too.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if I ever noticed it before, but I was like, hey, wait a minute, we had those.
When I was a kid, I lived for junk shops. I lived for cheap crap, little wind-up monster
God, yeah.
toys, little gags and pranks and snapping gum and Mexican jumping beans and x-ray specs, all of it.
Yeah, I mean, who didn't live for that junk when you were a little kid? So it punches him in the face, and he's like, And then Weeds, who's doing a lot of heavy lifting, comes around the corner laughing his ass off, and he's like, the look on your face. But the kid was no actor, so it was just a blank look, and he clearly knew that a boxing glove was going to punch him in the face. But Mary Beth comes along. Well, the kid's like, what are those? Super specs. And then Mary Beth's like, oh yeah, they make you look cool. And she puts them on again, and she sees the woman shrouded in black holding a book. No one believes her because, of course, it's April Fool's. So they leave the school, right? And something else I never noticed before, when they walk out the big giant doors, there's like a bunch of kids on the stairs doing like weird yoga. I wonder if they were like, okay, we're like in voodoo world now. Like, let's get some weird shit in the background. We'll have these weirdos doing Tai Chi yoga on the railings of the stairs outside the school.
I just assumed that was Canada.
Yeah, maybe it was. I missed that part. So then they come outside, and she puts the specs on again, and she sees the woman, but Weeds puts on the glasses and does not see the woman. Mary Beth goes, and then throws the specs in the trash. She screams for like 0.2 seconds. It's kind of funny. And I'm sure there's a Dutch angle in there. Weeds and his pal, his boxing glove pal, are playing horse out on the basketball court. He's about to lose, so he puts the monkey bones on the basketball, but he airballs it. His buddy's like, you lose, horse, you owe me 2 Cokes. And they walk away. Presumably, they're done playing. Weeds throws the basketball over his shoulder without looking, and it swishes. So once again, the monkey bones have had some sort of effect that Weeds has not noticed.
At this point, I really got to ask, what is the MacGuffin of this episode? Are they the super specs? Is it the old voodoo spellbook? Is it the powdered monkey bones? It's sort of a two-hander with Weeds and MB, but MB is the one who's sort of driving the horror plot, because every time she puts on these cursed glasses, she sees these shadow people.
I guess it's just so that we know the magic is real, but the second sight glasses wouldn't have worked unless Weeds had said the spell of second sight and thrown the monkey bones onto the glasses by accident.
True.
And all the super specs glimmer when he says the spell, and so now there's like a whole tray of super specs, actual working super specs at Sardo's. But the weird thing is that only Mary Beth can see into the other, can see whatever's happening, but it's never really explained why she can see it and no one else can, because she didn't get sprayed by monkey bones, unless maybe she breathed some of it in when Weeds threw it in the air.
She did a filthy suck and got a mouthful of monkey bones.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know. Kids show. Rules be damned.
You're right. But now I think I understand what you were saying before about how there is some fat that could be trimmed from this episode, because all you need is Mary Beth with the super specs seeing shadow people. You don't need any of this other stuff.
No, the basketball stuff, the yogurt stuff, it's kind of superfluous, and it feels like a little bit like padding. Mary Beth is walking home with the friend of Yogurt Girl, and the girl never mentions the fact that her friend turned into a chipmunk voice. She's just like, hey, anyway, how's your day going? I feel like she would have been like, Jesus Christ, the craziest thing happened.
Well, it was a walk and talk, and they'd already talked about that.
Maybe we missed that part. And Mary Beth is not like, I'm seeing all this crazy shit. She's like, man, Weeds is so immature. For her 1-week anniversary, he gave me this crappy book on mummies, which I'm like, geez, that's pretty cool. 1-week anniversary, he's giving you presents, and cool mummy presents. Anyway, she's rooting around in her bag, and she finds the specs that she threw in the garbage, which is kind of another kids ghost show. Comes out of nowhere because now the super specs have ghost powers. Like in a lot of ghost stories, you throw away the cursed item, but it comes back to you. The cursed camera always comes back, etc. and so on. So she flips out. She runs to Sardo's. She throws him through a little mail slot in his door because it's closed, I guess. She goes back to her house, and she gets a cookie out of the cookie jar, which I found delightful because I've never put a cookie in a cookie jar, but that's beside the point. She is rooting around through her bag, and the specs are back in her bag again. So she puts the specs on, and I actually really like this sequence because she's kind of just slowly walking around her house while this proto-trip-hop music kind of plays. And she's seeing like steaming tea kettle on her stove where there is no tea kettle when she takes off the specs. She's seeing this roaring fire in the fireplace where there is no roaring fire. And eventually she sees the woman with the book in her bedroom. But when she takes the specs off, she's not there. She turns around. There is a whole group of shadow people behind her in her room, and at this point she's so creeped out that it Dutch angles so hard that the entire camera flips upside down, and she runs out of her house to go find Weeds. She finds them back at the basketball court. I guess they decided not to end their game after all. And she's like, Weeds, you gotta help me. I'm seeing all these crazy people. She puts the specs on and she sees a bunch of shrouded shadow people playing basketball with a black basketball.
The black basketball made me laugh.
They're just playing basketball, but when she puts the specs on and looks at them, they stop and they come towards her. And sometimes the woman with the book is like beckoning her and whatnot. And so it's like, it seems like the people aren't aware of her until she puts the specs on, because they're just going about their business. So it would have behooved her really to just not put the specs on anymore. She runs back to Sardo. He's like, it's not my fault if your shit doesn't work. And she's like, no, it does work. And then he's like, what? So he brings her inside. As usual, we have to kind of do a hard reboot on Sardo. He's not aware that magic is real. He's looking through his book and he's like, oh yeah, Tale of Second Sight. He says, sometimes there are windows into other dimensions. And Mary Beth says, there's another dimension in my house? Sardo is like, yeah, I can close the window. But he says, whoa, I'm out of monkey bones. And I just sold the last pouch to your boyfriend. Cut to Weeds about to flush the monkey bones because he's so pissed at them for not working. And Mary Beth grabs his hand just before he can flush them and says, you flushed those monkey bones? You're going in after him. So they set up this seance and they got the crystal ball and Sardo is doing his thing.
Send them back. Send them back.
Weeds is giving him a lot of shit, which I find funny. And at one point he says,
I am very, very embarrassed for this guy.
Mary Beth's like, don't you need the monkey bones? And he's like, oh yeah, right. So he does a spell from the book, the big leather-bound book, and he tosses some monkey bones over the crystal ball, and suddenly the lights go down, and the crystal ball starts glowing. The table floats off the ground and starts rocking around. They're like, oh Jesus, what the fuck's going on? So Mary Beth puts on the specs and sees that they are surrounded by shadow figures. And Weeds, who's covered in monkey bones, Weeds is like, take them off. And she's like, but I can see them. And he's like, I can see them too. So now everybody can see that they're surrounded by shadow figures. They're like, Sardo, save us. Throw away the key to this other dimension. And Sardo starts doing some spells, and then Mary Beth throws the monkey bones into the air and says, go away. And then everything cuts to black. Everything goes quiet. And they're like, we did it. And then suddenly they see two gigantic eyeballs floating in the air above them. And Sardo says, take the children. And Carl cowers under the table. And then these eyeballs in this crazy distorted voice are like,
you have tampered with the cosmic seal. Balance must be restored. Lux Moray! Lux Moray!
Bombone! And then they get blasted into oblivion. Hard cut to the other dimension, and the shrouded lady with the book takes the hood off, and a Weeds Mary Beth analog come out. The lady's like, oh, sometimes there are doorways into other dimensions, and they were trying to close your dimensional window or something, but I blasted them, don't you worry about it. And she shows them her crystal ball, wherein Sardo, Mary Beth, and Weeds are trapped for all eternity, I guess. Then we cut back to the Midnight Society, where Gary hands out some super specs, tells everyone to put them on, and as soon as they do, they see a black shrouded figure, and they all run away screaming. And Kristen says, well, I guess your stories are scary after all. And David takes off his black hood and says, haha, the end.
Great episode. Definitely expanded the canon on both the Midnight Society and Sardo, which I want to dive into. But first, a few notes. Shadow MB, her peace sign was upside down. In the Shadow Dimension, the woman with the spell book in all black, she pulls off her hood and reveals that she just has a normal face under there, which makes me think that in the Shadow Dimension, the people playing basketball were wearing all black body stockings that they could just take off at any point.
Yeah, but then alternate analog Mary Beth and Weeds don't have black body stockings.
Right, because they were not being viewed through super specs.
Right, but like you just said, the lady has the black cloak and hood even just normally. She's not being looked at through super specs anymore.
It's sort of a double-assed thing. It's not half-assed, it's double-assed.
Yeah. I guess they just did that so that you would know that the lady at the end was the same woman she'd been seeing. Otherwise, you'd be like, who's this lady now? I don't know.
And she speaks in a creepy, deep voice because she was the witch who resealed the dimensional barrier or whatever. Is she an alternate version of Sardo that actually understands magic, unlike Sardo, who's a buffoon?
I think so.
I love when a story finds some alternate world and then it ends through the looking glass, where you actually end the story with the alternate selves.
Yeah.
And they've resolved our world, or whatever the world we began with. Do you remember that old episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Yes.
Where everyone thinks they're going crazy, and then they realize it's a spell or it's a demon or something that's doing it to them. But then they cut out to Buffy inside a padded cell.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, oh, yeah, she thinks she's a vampire slayer in some other world. And then they end the episode that way. And I thought that was so creepy.
That is cool. I don't know if that was, if they're the ones who started it, but that was a humongous trope in 90s television where your beloved characters would wake up in a padded cell, and the question was whether they'd been imagining it the whole time. And then, of course, by the end of the episode, they realized even Community did it to wonderful effect. So, like, once Community is parodying your thing, you know it's a trope.
So what do you think? Huh? Are you impressed?
All right, let's get into some ratings. So you had mentioned Time to Sleaze for Tales from the Crypt. I think that's wonderful, but obviously it's usually Time to Shrew or Kryptonite, and I don't think that applies here.
Nope.
This is an interesting one. So body count for Tales from the Crypt is 1, I presume. It was +1, then -1, then +1, then -1, and ultimately I think it ends at 1. Body count for Tale of Super Specs, 3?
They're still alive in that crystal ball, unless they're spirits.
Hard to say.
1 monkey.
Scare factor, Tales from the Crypt, I would say that jump scare at the beginning in the morgue was crazy.
Yeah, and I think it was
really aggressive.
Also very psychologically upsetting.
Oh, yeah. Psychological terror factor incredibly high. Really, really disturbing episode for Super Specs.
I think it was high. I used to love it when the shadow figures came out and when the eyeballs come out in the air and everything's swirling around and they're getting blasted into the darkness and stuff. It's crazy.
On the one hand, it's creepy with the shadow people, and that is still a popular sort of paranormal or copy pasta thing. You know, this sort of legends and cryptids, it's shadow people. There's shadow people out there, and people have taken pictures of them, etc. And then when the eyeballs pop out, it goes all like Pink Floyd, hallucinatory, crazy cosmic horror. Gets really, really crazy at the end. That's
yeah.
Awesome.
I have to dock at several sunlight points, but other than that, yeah, I do think it's pretty good.
Gross factor, monkey bones are gross. However, we only see them in a chalky powdered form.
Yeah.
Although they do go in a girl's yogurt. And she eats it.
Oh, that gives it a few gross points.
Gross factor high. However, gross factor of these vivisections and dissections in the morgue.
Although amazingly,
so nasty.
You're seeing through the guy's eyes most of the time, so you don't even see when he's like cutting his head open, and it's a prank, so he's not actually doing it. But even later, when the doctors actually do it, you're seeing it from his point of view, and all you see is like a little blood dripping down. You don't see them like literally cutting into his skull and stuff, which was like incredibly restrained. I mean, it's just good filmmaking because that was the whole point. But for Tales from the Crypt, it's like, whoa, they didn't show his skull being sawn into.
Although they did rip out his brain, and then they're like, haha, it's a fake brain.
But yes, gross factor high.
Hang him up on a meat hook and stuff like that.
Sort of, yeah. And it's weird because he fell to the ground, and then when they came back in, he was in a pool of blood and stuff. That was a lot of fucking blood for him to have lost through his nose.
Yeah, especially since his heart was not functioning.
It should have all congealed in his back and his buttocks.
That's right. What the factor for Tales from the Crypt? I mean, I'm still not sure I've untangled that episode, so I'm going to say all-time high what the factor. What the factor for Super Specs?
I think it was pretty high. It was hard to suss out factor. I don't know.
It was
teleporting Super Specs, Second Sight, but not really Second Sight. Mary Beth is special. For some reason, they go, oh, she opened well, Sardo was bullshitting at this point, but he's like, you must have opened a dimensional window in your house. But it's not. It's everywhere. She sees it first in Sardo's, so I guess you just have to, again, assume that he's bullshitting her, and it's not really in her house. But it is kind of centered there, because that's where even the alternate lady performs the exorcism.
I would say that the what the factor is high in both, but the tone of the What the Factor is different because in Tale of the Super Specs, nothing is explained, and in Abracadaver, everything is explained, but nothing is consistent.
Yeah.
Vink Factor. What do you think is the Vink Factor of Dr. Martin Fairbanks?
Yeah, it's pretty good. He's doing magic and
one-armed
science.
voodoo scientist.
Yeah, and he's kind of sloppy. He's kind of a sloppy Bill Bridges.
But you've also got Sardo, who's a bit of a Vink himself.
Sardo Factor.
So I think those cancel each other out. Theme of April Fools?
Was Tales from the Crypt set at April Fools, or were they simply playing pranks on each other?
It was specifically a birthday prank. They did not state whether or not it was on April Fools. If this was a non-April, if this was just a run-of-the-mill birthday prank, I shudder to think what they did to each other on April Fool's Day.
Well, yeah, you really can't. How do you top murder?
Yeah.
You can't.
The greatest prank of all.
It's not really fair because we stated that the theme was April Fools, but I think I'll just give them a tie each. Because even though they say April Fools a billion times. Yeah.
However, secret theme, unplanned theme, voodoo.
High in both
stories. These are neck and neck.
How did we pick such great matching episodes?
Now we come into our always contentious category, totally 80s. This is something you might not remember.
Nope.
But you have to understand. In the
Lab
80s,
coats are not 80s.
Voodoo was a big thing. We've seen it before in Tales from the Crypt. Rastafarianism, reggae, Rasta wigs, like that was sort of a stock character. You bring in the crazy Rastafarian, and morgues and mortuaries were sort of a reoccurring thing in horror in the 80s. I think it was just that maybe special effects had gotten to a certain point, practical special effects.
Yeah, where they had bodies,
where they
like
could
good bodies.
Do more creepy stuff where you're cutting people open and you're sucking out fluids and things like that.
It was the age of practical effects for sure. Maybe in those go-go Reagan 80s, they had nothing to fear but death itself.
Right. So I'm going to say for those reasons, 80s factor high.
Sure, I'll give it to you.
Hella 90s for Super Specs.
Aside from the general production design, which is just they filmed what they had available, and it happened to be the 90s, I don't think it was particularly 90s, really. Blank for Dummies was kind of a 90s thing.
That's true. So I'm looking over these ratings here. Winner, Tales from the Crypt. One running bit through all of Sardo's stories is that he's always trying to sell fake vomit. And so I asked ChatGPT to write us a story about fake vomit. So Ryan, as an aspiring screenwriter, how do you feel about AI?
I'm being peeled! They're tearing my skull apart!
Rerun from AI!
I don't think they'll be bothering you anymore.